There we go. That should help a little bit. I invite you to turn in your Bibles with me to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. We're going to be looking there at an individual who lived during the patriarchal dispensation, one that we don't often consider, and that is the man named Esau. I want to read a few verses that tell us a little bit about his life, beginning in Genesis 25 and verse 20. It says, Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian, of Padanaram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, If all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 people shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was all like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Esau, as we've just read, was one of the twin sons born to Isaac and Rebekah. And after their marriage, at first, Rebekah was barren. And Isaac prayed for her, and God gave them children, gave them twins, in answer to his prayers. And Esau struggled with Jacob before his birth. And we just read that Esau was a hairy baby, and that's what Esau means. And Jacob means supplanter, the one who replaces another. You can see that in Jacob grabbing a hold of his brother's heel, that he was going to take his place. And God said 2 nations would come from them. The nation of Edom descended from Esau, and the Israelites descended from Israel, who was Jacob. Remember, Jacob wrestled with the angel, and his name was changed to Israel. And so the Israelites descended from Jacob. Esau was a hunter, while Jacob dwelled in tents. He was a shepherd. And Esau was Isaac's favorite. But Rebekah favored Jacob. Jacob was her favorite. Esau's life provides lessons for us today. And Paul spoke of that in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 11. He said, Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, of whom on the ends of the ages have come. So we are to learn from the things that we read that in the Bible, those records that we read about in the Old Testament, like this one. Notice that Esau had some distinct advantages. We don't know how much older he was than his brother Jacob. It sounds like he was a few hours older, but nevertheless, he was the oldest son, and the oldest son had advantages, even in the patriarchal age. And some of these were made part of the law of Moses. First of all, he was entitled to the birthright, And that means that he would have gotten a double share of his father's inheritance. So if he had not sold his birthright, he would have gotten 2/3, and Jacob would have gotten 1/3. He would have gotten the greatest blessing from his father Isaac, and the oldest son was due to receive that as well. And he would have been the head of the family after Isaac's death. So those were some great things that he had to look forward to. But Esau lost his birthright. He came home from an unsuccessful hunt one time, and he was very tired and very hungry. And Jacob had food prepared. He had the New King James says, a red stew prepared. And that's interesting because Edom, the descendants of Esau, means red. That means red. It refers back to that food that Esau wanted. Esau asked for a portion of that stew, and Jacob offered to sell it to him for his birthright. And Esau exaggerated his hunger and rationalized the sale of his birthright. Verse 32 says of chapter 25, says, and Esau said, look, I'm about to die. So what is this birthright to me? And you hear people sometimes say, I'm starving to death. I've got a neighbor that says that frequently. I'm starving to death. Well, really, he's not. And Esau wasn't either. We read of people that went without food for 40 days and 40 nights in the Bible. So certainly he could have made it a few more days, but he wasn't willing to discipline himself to do that. He wasn't willing to control his desire for food that long. So he rationalized his situation. And verse 34 tells us that Esau despised his birthright. He despised it because he sold it to his brother Jacob. Esau also lost his blessing, that great blessing that he would have gotten from Isaac. Now, he lost this by deceit. His mother, who favored Jacob, deceived Isaac so that Jacob pretended to be Esau, and his father was almost blind, and he persuaded his father that he was Esau, and his father gave him the greatest blessing. And that included that he would rule over his brethren. And we notice that God had already predicted that one people would be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. The younger got the birthright. The younger got the blessing. And so indeed, though Esau was older, he gave up or lost his blessing as well as his birthright. I believe God allowed that because he had so despised his birthright. And usually both of those went to the same child, usually both of them, the birthright and the chief blessing. Now, Rebekah and Jacob were wrong in doing that. They lied and they deceived Isaac. They were wrong. But God allowed it because Jacob had thought so little of his birthright. Notice how Esau responded to that. It seems like he finally realized what he'd done. It finally hit home to him. He was brokenhearted and he wept. Not only does verse 34 tell us about that, it says in chapter 27, I'm in the wrong chapter here, if I can get there. It says, when Esau heard these words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me also, O my father. And the Hebrew writer refers to this very thing in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 17. He refers to Esau's sorrow after he had lost his blessing. And he wanted Isaac still to bless him. And says, afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. Couldn't change the past. Isaac had already given his brother Jacob the greater blessing. And he did give Esau a lesser blessing. He couldn't give him the same one. And because of that deceit and losing his blessing, he hated his brother Jacob. And he determined he was going to kill him. After the death of his father, Isaac, and after they had mourned for Isaac, he planned to kill his brother Jacob. Now, Isaac and Rebekah sent Jacob off to his uncle. And there were two reasons for that are given here. One was so his brother wouldn't kill him. That's one. The other was they wanted him to find a wife there among his uncle's family that would fear God, that would not be an idolater. So he had two purposes there. Why did Esau lose his birthright and his blessing? Well, first of all, it wasn't because he was weak and hungry when he sold his birthright. He could have gone several days without food. It wasn't because he was about to starve to death. Nor was it because Jacob took advantage of him, and he did. Jacob did take advantage of his brother, but he allowed Jacob to take advantage of him. He accepted Jacob's bargain, and that showed how little he thought of his birthright. That showed where his priorities were. He thought more of the food than he did his birthright. Esau wasn't a bad man. He wasn't harsh. He wasn't mean to other people. He wasn't dishonest. He wasn't a murderer. There's no indication that he deceived people the way his brother deceived him or deceived Isaac. There's no indication of that. Matter of fact, later, it seems that he's certainly changed his thinking about his brother. When he meets Jacob coming back from Padan Aram with his family, his wives and his family, he's ready to forgive him. And he refused the gifts that Jacob offered him. It's interesting there that we read about how they met and how Jacob had put his other wives, other than Rachel, in the front with their children, and Rachel and her children in the back, because he loved Rachel more. And he feared that if there was going to be trouble, there was going to be war, he wanted at least Rachel and her children to survive. But he even refused the gifts that Jacob offered him. That was unusual. And he reconciled with his brother. So it wasn't those things. It wasn't he was a bad person. Simply, it was because his values were wrong. He placed a higher value on a full stomach than his birthright. Today, I guess that would be like selling a house for a hamburger, something similar. Not appreciating things that are precious and things that are really valuable. And it was because he was a profane man. And that's what the Hebrew writer tells us. The Hebrew writer describes Esau as being a profane man. Notice Hebrews 12 and verse 16. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. What does it mean to be profane? Well, it means to be irreligious, to lack any relationship to God. I suppose it's the opposite of things that are holy, things that are profane, things that are common, that have no relationship. with religion or serving God. Those things are profane. As far as I can tell, we have no record of Esau ever worshiping God. I think that's interesting. Esau was focused on the physical and the material, not the spiritual. He valued present pleasure more than future reward. That birthright, when he was hungry, seemed to be a long way in the future. And he wanted that food more than the birthright. That was different from his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham. Notice what the Hebrew writer says about Isaac and Abraham. It says, by faith, speaking of Abraham specifically, by faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. They were content to wait for the greater blessings that God had in store for them. Esau was not. Esau was not content. He wanted what he wanted now. That sound like some people? It is. Still a lot of people that way. Esau walked by sight, not by faith. We're told as Christians in 2 Corinthians 5:7, we walk by faith, not by sight. Well, Esau walked by sight, what he could see and what he could enjoy. That's the reason that God rejected Esau. That's the reason he lost his birthright and his blessing. And there are many people like that today. And the warning that we have in Hebrews 12 suggests that Christians can be like that. That Christians can have a misplaced priorities and be profane in their thinking. Notice also Esau's marriages. Esau's marriages also show his profane nature. He married two women. Genesis 26 tells us. These women were Hittite women, and they were probably idolaters. They probably were idol worshipers. He married them without giving any consideration to what his parents thought or whether they would approve or not. And his choice grieved his parents. And that leads me to believe these women were idolaters, probably, because it grieved Rebekah and Isaac. And he didn't consider God's will in the matter either. Esau chose what pleased him. Now, it's true that later on he saw that it displeased his parents. The wives that he had married displeased his parents, and he went to Ishmael and he married a third wife who was the daughter of Ishmael. Notice that God blessed Esau. First, he blessed him with honors, and he failed to appreciate those, his birthright and his blessing, and he lost them because he failed to appreciate them. The Lord also blessed him with great prosperity. And as I was looking at this in Genesis 36, it reminded me of Abraham and Lot. You remember how their herds grew so much that they had to separate? Well, that's what happened with Jacob and Esau. Esau had so much cattle that he had to separate from his brother Jacob. Genesis 36, 6 and 7. God gave Esau a land that was east of Canaan, and it was called Mount Seir or Seir. And when the Israelites came out of Egypt, God told them, don't try to take that land away. Don't try to conquer that land, because he had given it to Esau's descendants. God refused to let Israel take it. He said, you buy what you need from them. Don't try to take it. So God had blessed Esau, and he blessed him with a large number of descendants that comprised the nation of Edom. Edom wasn't a righteous nation. but God had promised that land to them, and he allowed them to live in it and to have it. Notice some lessons I think we can see in the life of Esau. First of all, favoritism in a family is going to cause problems. When there's more than one child and the parent favors one over the other, that's a bad approach to parenting. And it'll promote strife rather than love. It'll promote disagreements, bad feelings when one parent favors the other. Remember, Isaac preferred Esau because he was a hunter. He was a man of the field, a hunter, and he ate what he was able to kill. And Rebekah thought more of Jacob, who was a mild man and was a shepherd. And it caused problems in their family. That was the reason that basically Jacob was able to steal his brother's birthright, or his brother's blessing, excuse me. It'll still cause trouble today in families. So favoritism is something that needs to be avoided. You folks who are raising children. Notice the importance of choosing a mate here. It's the second most important choice in one person and a person's life, is who you're going to marry and live with the rest of your life. The first choice we saw this morning, or this afternoon, when Miles was baptized into Christ. To choose Jesus, to follow Jesus, is the most important choice. And I think to choose a spouse is the second. Esau chose for his own pleasure. He was selfish. He didn't consider what his parents wanted, didn't consider what God wanted him to do. Today, God wants Christians today to marry faithful Christians. You might say, where is that found in the scriptures? Well, that statement is not found in the scriptures, as I stated it. But the idea is there. In 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 39, Paul is giving instruction to widows, Christian widows. And he says that if they are widows and their husband's gone, they are free to marry, but he says only in the Lord. That's interesting. That suggests to me that Christian widows ought to marry faithful Christian men. They ought to find a faithful Christian man. And I think it should apply to all who are Christians today. When Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, the situation was different from today. There were those who had obeyed the gospel and their spouse hadn't. And the spouse wasn't a Christian. And today, that still occurs, but it's not quite the same as it was then. We need to be spiritually minded. Esau was not. Esau was not spiritually minded. He valued food and earthly pleasures more than he did his relationship to God and even the blessings that he could have in his family. We need to put spiritual things first. And that's what Paul encourages in Colossians chapter 3. He says, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. Spiritual things need to be first in the Christian's life. Esau was rejected because he was irreligious. And we can't please God and be like Esau. Notice what Paul wrote to the Romans in Romans 8, verses 5 and 6. He said, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Those that put spiritual things first will have spiritual life and a peace that passes all understanding. So it's important that we remember that we're to put spiritual things first. Esau lost a lot, but we have a greater birthright than Esau had. Our birthright is eternal life in heaven, much greater than Esau's birthright or his blessing. And it can be lost, contrary to what some of our religious neighbors tell us. The Christian can lose that. We need to cultivate an appreciation and a desire for spiritual things and put those first in our lives. And if we do that, we'll please God and He'll continue to bless us. Can we assist you in changes that you need to make in your life this afternoon? If so, we'd be glad to do it. If you'll let your need be known by coming forward while we stand and while we sing.